The dusty wind rolled slowly through the small frontier town of Red Hollow as wagons creaked and horses stamped their hooves in the dry dirt. It was the kind of town where hope arrived slowly and heartbreak came quickly. Outside the general store, a crowd of ranchers and cowboys gathered around a tall wooden board where a traveling marriage broker had pinned photographs and letters of women from the East who were willing to travel west to become wives. The broker, a thin man with a waxed mustache named Mr. Caldwell, rubbed his hands together eagerly as he presented the photographs like a salesman displaying rare goods. "Gentlemen," he announced proudly, "I have brought the finest selection of mail-order brides you'll find anywhere on the frontier." The men leaned closer, whispering and chuckling as they examined the pictures. Some pointed to smiling women with bright dresses, others laughed while reading the letters describing skills in cooking, sewing, or piano playing. Within minutes, the most beautiful brides were claimed. A tall rancher chose a woman named Eleanor because she had elegant handwriting. Another cowboy chose a cheerful girl named Daisy because her photograph showed a bright smile. One by one, the pictures disappeared from the board as excited men paid deposits to claim their future wives. But at the bottom of the board remained one photograph no one even touched. It was a small picture of a quiet young woman named Clara Bennett. Her dress was plain, her hair loosely tied, and her eyes looked tired instead of cheerful. Her letter was short, written in careful words that sounded almost apologetic. It explained that she had worked in a sewing factory in Boston but lost her job after her father passed away. She didn't promise beauty, wealth, or talents, only loyalty, kindness, and a willingness to work hard beside any man willing to give her a chance. Yet the cowboys barely glanced at her picture. One of them snorted and said, "She looks like trouble." Another shrugged and muttered, "No smile, no charm, why bother?" Soon the board was nearly empty except for Clara's photograph. The men began drifting away, satisfied with their choices, laughing as they imagined their future brides arriving on the next train. Just then, the saloon doors creaked open and a tall cowboy stepped into the street. His boots were dusty, his coat worn by years of hard ranch work, and a deep scar crossed his jaw. Everyone in Red Hollow knew him, Ethan Cole, the quiet rancher who lived alone on the far edge of the valley. Ethan rarely came into town unless he needed supplies, and he spoke even less often than he appeared. The crowd grew silent as he approached the board. "Mr. Caldwell straightened excitedly and gestured toward the remaining photograph. "You're just in time, Mr. Cole. I still have a few excellent brides left if you're interested." Ethan studied the board slowly. His eyes moved over the empty spaces where photographs had been, then stopped at the single picture still hanging there. Clara Bennett. He reached up and gently lifted the photograph from the nail, studying her tired expression. The broker cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, that one hasn't received much attention, but perhaps you'd prefer someone else. I could arrange another shipment of brides next month." Ethan's voice was calm but firm. "Give me the one no one wanted." The words shocked the crowd. Several cowboys turned around in disbelief. One of them laughed loudly. "You serious, Cole? You could have picked first if you came earlier." Another said mockingly, "That girl's the leftover." Ethan didn't react to their laughter. His gaze remained fixed on the photograph as if he saw something no one else could. "She wrote an honest letter," he said quietly. "That's more than most people do." Mr. Caldwell blinked in surprise but quickly accepted the payment. "Very well, Mr. Cole. Clara Bennett will arrive on the afternoon train in 2 weeks." As the broker packed away the board, the other men shook their heads, whispering jokes about Ethan's strange choice. But Ethan simply tucked the photograph carefully into his coat pocket and walked toward his horse. That night on his lonely ranch, he sat beside the fireplace holding the small photograph again. The truth was, Ethan knew something about being unwanted. Years earlier he had returned from war with scars on his face and silence in his heart. Most people avoided him, thinking he was cold or dangerous. But he wasn't cold, just tired of pretending to be someone he wasn't. Looking at Clara's letter, he sensed the same quiet honesty he carried himself. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Clara Bennett sat nervously in a train carriage heading west. She clutched a small suitcase that contained all her belongings, a few dresses, a sewing kit, and the letter confirming her marriage arrangement. She had expected rejection. She assumed no one would choose her. When the broker's message arrived saying a rancher named Ethan Cole had chosen her, she read the letter 3 times in disbelief. The train rattled across endless plains as doubt filled her mind. What kind of man would choose the bride nobody else wanted? Was he cruel, desperate, or something worse. Clara stared out the window at the fading sunset and whispered a quiet prayer that perhaps, just perhaps, this stranger might offer her the one thing she had never truly known in life, a place where she belonged. And as the train carried her closer to Red Hollow, neither she nor Ethan realized that their unexpected meeting would soon change not only their own lives, but the hearts of everyone in that lonely frontier town. And if this story already has you wondering what will happen next between a cowboy the world avoided and a bride no one chose, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because sometimes the greatest stories begin where everyone else stops looking. The afternoon train shrieked loudly as it slowed into Red Hollow Station, sending clouds of steam curling into the bright frontier sky. Several cowboys stood waiting along the platform, adjusting their hats nervously as they prepared to meet the women they had chosen weeks earlier. Laughter and excitement filled the air as the train doors opened and elegantly dressed brides stepped onto the wooden platform, clutching small suitcases and glancing around nervously at their future husbands. Some reunions were joyful. A rancher lifted his bride into a hug while another awkwardly tipped his hat to the smiling woman approaching him. But at the far end of the platform stood Ethan Cole, silent and still like a shadow among the crowd. He didn't wave or call out, he simply watched each passenger step down from the train. Finally, near the end of the line, a young woman in a simple gray dress carefully descended the steps while gripping a worn suitcase. Her eyes scanned the crowd with uncertainty. Clara Bennett looked smaller than Ethan expected, almost fragile, but there was determination in the way she stood despite the long journey. She seemed ready for disappointment. When their eyes met, she hesitated. Ethan stepped forward slowly and removed his hat. "Clara Bennett?" he asked quietly. She nodded, clearly nervous. "Yes, and you must be Mr. Cole." He gave a small nod. For a moment neither spoke, the noise of the crowd fading around them. Clara seemed surprised that Ethan wasn't staring at her critically like the others had in Boston when she applied for the program. Instead, he simply looked calm. "Long journey," he said gently. "You must be tired." Clara blinked, in surprise. "Yes, a little." He took her suitcase without another word and gestured toward his horse waiting nearby. Some of the cowboys whispered as they watched the quiet pair leave town. One muttered jokingly, "Cole got himself the quietest bride of the bunch." Another laughed, "Maybe they won't say a single word to each other for 10 years. But as Ethan helped Clara onto the wagon and began the long ride to his ranch, something unexpected began to happen. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, it felt peaceful. Clara noticed the way Ethan slowed the wagon whenever the road grew rough so she wouldn't be shaken. When the cold evening wind picked up, he quietly placed his coat around her shoulders without comment. These small gestures slowly eased the fear in her heart. By the time they reached the ranch under a sky full of stars, Clara realized something surprising. This strange cowboy who barely spoke had already shown her more kindness in one afternoon than many people had in her entire life. Over the following weeks Clara worked hard beside Ethan on the ranch. She repaired torn clothes, cooked simple meals, and even learned to help with the horses. The other ranchers expected the marriage to fail quickly, but something different was growing between them. Ethan began speaking more, telling her stories about the valley and the ranch he built alone after the war. Clara shared memories of her father and the quiet dreams she once had before hardship forced her to survive day by day. Slowly the house that had once felt empty began to feel like a home. One evening, months later, the same cowboys who had laughed at Ethan gathered again in town. But this time the conversation was different. Several had discovered their perfect brides weren't as happy as expected. Some marriages were filled with arguments, others with disappointment. As Ethan and Clara rode into town together, the crowd noticed something remarkable. Clara was smiling now, truly smiling, and Ethan looked lighter, as if the weight he carried for years had finally lifted. "Mr. Caldwell," the broker approached them in amazement. "Well, you two seem to be doing quite well." Ethan simply nodded while Clara laughed softly. One of the cowboys who had mocked Ethan earlier scratched his head and said, "Cole, you might have been the smartest one of us all." Ethan glanced at Clara beside him and replied quietly, "I just chose the one who was honest." The truth soon became clear to everyone in Red Hollow. The bride nobody wanted had brought warmth and life to the loneliest ranch in the valley, and the cowboy everyone feared had become a man with laughter in his home again. Sometimes the world overlooks the most valuable hearts simply because they don't shine the loudest at first glance. But when someone finally sees their true worth, everything can change. And that, friends, is why kindness and patience often lead to the greatest love stories ever told. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that the people others ignore may hold the most beautiful souls, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and join us for more unforgettable stories from the Wild West, where hope often arrives in the most unexpected ways.